Have you ever been told to follow the rules, even when you knew breaking them was the right thing to do? Maybe it was at work, maybe at school. That moment when following procedure would lead to disaster, but breaking the rules could cost you everything. That split second where you have to choose between doing what you're told and doing what needs to be done. Today, I'm going to tell you about a 26-year-old Navy pilot who had exactly 30 seconds to make that choice, and his decision saved 1,000 lives. Welcome to History of World War II, where we tell real stories about real people who faced impossible choices with no good answers. This isn't AI-generated what-if garbage. This isn't speculation or fantasy scenarios. This is actual history, researched from military records, pilot accounts, and declassified documents, told the way it deserves to be told, by a human, for humans. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because we're bringing you the stories that other channels either don't know about or don't tell correctly. And to everyone who's already part of this community, thank you. Seriously, you're the reason we can keep digging through archives and telling these stories the right way. Now, let me introduce you to a man the Marines never knew saved their lives. September 12, 1944. 8,000 feet above Peleliu Island, Pacific Ocean. Major Robert Cowboy Stout is flying his F6F Hellcat alone over enemy territory. The automatic camera in his aircraft clicks steadily, taking reconnaissance photos. His mission today is simple: photograph an abandoned Japanese airfield, return to USS Hornet, file a report. Intelligence says the field was bombed weeks ago. Nobody's using it. Routine mission, should be home for dinner. Then Stout looks down, and his entire world changes. The airfield isn't abandoned. It's absolutely packed with Japanese aircraft, Mitsubishi Zeros, Nakajima bombers. He starts counting. 10 aircraft, 20, 30, 40 planes lined up wingtip to wingtip like dominoes, with fuel drums stacked between them. Ground crews everywhere, loading ammunition, topping off fuel tanks, warming up engines. They're not hiding. They're preparing for a massive strike. And Stout knows exactly what they're preparing for. In 72 hours, 3 days from right now, 28,000 United States Marines are going to storm those beaches down there in one of the biggest amphibious assaults of the Pacific War. Young men, most of them not old enough to drink, packed into slow-moving landing craft, sitting, ducks, and these 40 Japanese aircraft, they're positioned to slaughter those Marines before they ever reach the beach. Now here's Stout's problem. Really think about this. His orders are crystal clear. Reconnaissance pilots observe and report. Take your photos. Radio back to command. Return to the carrier. Let the chain of command decide what to do. That's the procedure. That's how the military works. But Stout also understands military bureaucracy. By the time he lands, climbs out of his cockpit, walks to the ready room, sits down with intelligence officers, describes what he saw, has them verify coordinates on maps, brief the squadron commander, who briefs the air boss, who briefs the admiral, who authorizes a strike, who has operations assemble a proper attack force with fighters and bombers and escorts, brief the pilots, arm the aircraft, and launch them. We're talking hours, 6, 8, maybe 10 hours, possibly a full day. And by then, those Japanese aircraft will either scatter into the jungle and hide, or they'll already be in the air attacking the American fleet. The Marines don't have a day. They need these planes dead now. So what would you do? Seriously, drop a comment right now and tell me, what would you have done in Stout's position? Follow orders and let 1,000 Marines die while you file paperwork, or break every rule and probably get shot down or court-martialed? And if you're appreciating this story told the right way, with real research, real facts, human storytelling, not AI slop, hit that like button. It helps YouTube show this to more people who care about actual history. Now let me tell you why this decision was even harder than it sounds. Here's something most people don't understand about military protocol. Those rules exist for really good reasons. Robert Stout's training was crystal clear. Reconnaissance pilots have exactly one job: observe and report. You spot enemy forces, you radio coordinates, you return to base, you let command decide the response, You do not engage, especially not alone, especially not against an entire airfield full of anti-aircraft guns, especially not when you're in a fighter loaded for reconnaissance, not for attack. And there are excellent reasons for these rules. First, reconnaissance pilots are valuable. They have specialized training, specialized equipment. The fleet needs them for intelligence gathering. Losing them on unauthorized cowboy missions, ironic, given Stout's nickname, means losing capability you can't easily replace. Second, one pilot's assessment might be wrong. Maybe those aren't all operational aircraft. Maybe it's a decoy to lure in American attackers. Maybe there's a larger Japanese air group somewhere else that's the real threat. You need command-level intelligence to see the big picture. Third, and this is critical, military operations require coordination. If every pilot just attacked whatever they felt like, you'd have chaos, friendly fire, wasted resources, missed opportunities. The chain of command exists because war is complicated and somebody needs to coordinate everything. Stout understood all of this. He wasn't some reckless Top Gun wannabe looking for glory. But he also understood something about bureaucracy that anyone who's ever worked in a large organization will recognize. Sometimes the process takes so long that by the time you follow all the correct procedures, the opportunity is gone. You've experienced this, right? Not in combat, but in life. You see a problem, you know exactly how to fix it. But you have to email your boss, who checks with their boss, who schedules a meeting, who gets approval from 3 departments, and by the time everyone signs off 2 weeks later, the problem has gotten 10 times worse. Stout was circling at 8,000 feet, watching Japanese crews fuel those aircraft, and he was doing that exact math in his head. By the time the proper strike force arrived, if they believed his report, if they prioritized it over other targets, if the weather held, if a dozen other things went right, those 40 aircraft would be gone. Or worse, they'd launch immediately, attack the fleet today, kill sailors and Marines before the invasion even started. Now let me paint you a picture of why this haunted Stout so much. He'd flown close air support at Tarawa in November 1943. That battle was one of the bloodiest nightmares in Marine Corps history. Marines packed into Higgins boats, those famous D-Day-style landing craft, heading toward the beach. The boats were slow, maybe 9 or 10 miles per hour. The Marines were jammed shoulder to shoulder, maybe 30 or 40 men per boat, loaded down with 60-80 pounds of equipment. They couldn't maneuver, couldn't take cover, couldn't defend themselves. When Japanese aircraft attacked at Tarawa, they strafed those boats like shooting fish in a barrel. Stout had watched this from his cockpit, helpless. His job was supporting Marines already on the beach, not defending the landing craft. By the time he could respond, dozens of Marines were already dead or dying in the water. The ocean turned red. Men jumped into the water to escape burning boats and drowned because they couldn't shed their heavy equipment fast enough. Others were killed by strafing runs before they ever touched land. That memory was burned into Stout's brain. And now, circling over Peleliu, he was looking at 40 Japanese aircraft positioned to do exactly the same thing in 3 days. Let me be really clear about who Robert Cowboy Stout was, because this matters. He wasn't reckless. He was 26 years old and had already flown 63 combat missions. 63 times this man had climbed into his aircraft, launched from a carrier in the middle of the Pacific, flown toward enemy territory, faced people actively trying to kill him, and somehow made it back alive. That's not luck, that's skill, experience, judgment. He'd survived dogfights with Zeros, aircraft that could outturn his Hellcat at low speeds, flown by Japanese pilots who'd been training since the 1930s. He'd attacked fortified islands where every palm tree might hide an anti-aircraft gun. He'd landed on carriers in storms that would make you seasick just watching the footage, bringing his aircraft down on a pitching, rolling deck in the middle of the ocean at night. The man knew how to calculate risk, and what he was considering now, attacking an entire airfield alone, wasn't just risky. It was potentially suicidal. Let's be honest about what attacking actually meant. Every anti-aircraft gun on Peleliu would target him the second he opened fire. Not 1 or 2 guns. Dozens of positions, all manned by experienced Japanese gunners who'd been shooting at American aircraft for 3 years of war. He'd be alone. No wingmen to suppress ground fire, no one to cover his escape, no backup if something went wrong. His Hellcat was tough. The F6F could take a beating, but one lucky shot to the engine would turn it into a 12,000-pound glider. One hit to the cockpit would kill him instantly. One ruptured fuel tank would turn the whole aircraft into a fireball. And if he went down on Peleliu, no rescue. The island was enemy-held. He'd either die in the crash, get captured and executed, or spend the rest of the war in a Japanese POW camp. And based on how the Japanese treated captured Allied pilots, death in the crash would probably be the better option. That's what attacking meant. Those were the stakes, but if he didn't attack, those 40 aircraft would launch. Japanese pilots would strafe the landing craft, bomb the transport ships, turn the beaches into killing zones before the Marines could establish any foothold. Young men, kids, really, bleeding out in landing craft, drowning in 3 feet of water because their equipment was too heavy, burning alive in transport ships. So there's your choice. Really sit with this for a second. Follow orders, land safely, file your report. Let someone else handle it. Those Marines die, but at least you followed procedure. Nobody can blame you. Or attack. Probably die trying. Maybe save 1,000 lives. But definitely end your career if you somehow survive. The decision took Robert Stout less than 30 seconds. He pushed the throttle forward and rolled his Hellcat into a steep dive toward the jungle. Now, before Stout went completely Rambo on this airfield, he did something smart that probably saved his life. He climbed higher and actually analyzed the target. See, this is the difference between a suicide attack and a calculated risk. Stout might have been breaking orders, but he wasn't being stupid about it. He studied how the Japanese had arranged everything, and he immediately spotted their critical mistake. They'd packed the planes too close together. When you're preparing a large strike force quickly, efficiency makes sense, right? Park aircraft wingtip to wingtip to minimize distance between them. Stack fuel drums between planes for easy access during refueling. Keep everything tight and organized. Logical, efficient. Also a fire hazard nightmare. Stout saw it immediately. Those fuel drums, aviation fuel, which is basically very explosive gasoline, were stacked in neat rows between every cluster of aircraft. The planes themselves had full fuel tanks for their planned strike. Ammunition was loaded or nearby. One good hit could start a chain reaction that would consume the entire field. He checked his ammunition. 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns, 2,400 rounds total. If he held the trigger down continuously, that gave him about 12 seconds of firing time. 12 seconds to destroy 40 aircraft. Impossible, if you tried to hit them individually. But if you light the right fuse, if you hit those fuel drums and start fires that spread to aircraft, which explode and spread to more fuel drums, which start more fires, 12 seconds might be just enough. His plan was simple. And by simple, I mean insanely dangerous but theoretically possible. Come in fast and low, below their radar coverage. Hit the fuel drums first, not the aircraft. Start fires. Let the fires do the work. Get out before every gun on the island turns you into Swiss cheese. Speed would be his defense. The Hellcat could hit 380 miles per hour at low altitude. That's fast enough that anti-aircraft gunners have trouble leading their shots properly. The aircraft is already somewhere else by the time they squeeze the trigger. He'd attack from multiple angles to keep them guessing. First pass from the north. Second pass from a different direction if he survived the first one. And critically, he'd know when to stop. Once his ammunition was gone, he was leaving, no loitering to assess damage, no heroic second chances. Empty guns mean go home. It was a plan that might work, or might get him killed in about 90 seconds. Stout checked his instruments one last time, said whatever prayer pilots say before doing something crazy, and pointed his nose at the tree line. The altimeter unwound like a broken clock as Stout dove toward the jungle. 8,000 feet. 7,000. 6,000. 5,000. At 2,000 feet, he leveled off and did something that would give any flight instructor a heart attack. He pushed the throttle to the firewall, maximum power, and dropped to barely 50 feet above the jungle canopy. 50 feet. That's a 4-story building. at 380 miles per hour, over dense tropical jungle. One wind gust, one moment of vertigo, one wrong input, and he'd cartwheel into the trees and explode. But 50 feet is also below the effective tracking range of most anti-aircraft guns. They're designed to shoot at aircraft thousands of feet up, not fighters screaming past at rooftop level. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine howled at maximum power, 2,000 horsepower shaking the entire airframe. Trees blurred beneath him, individual trunks invisible at this speed, just a green carpet rushing past. Then, through a gap in the trees, the airfield. And Stout's first thought was, intelligence was completely wrong. This wasn't some abandoned field with damaged aircraft. This was a fully operational Japanese airbase in the middle of preparing for a major operation. Ground crews everywhere, fuel trucks moving between aircraft, ammunition carts, at least 40 aircraft in various stages of preparation. Some with propellers turning, engines warming up, some being armed with bombs and torpedoes, some being topped off with fuel. Every single one about to have a very bad day. The Japanese spotted him maybe 2 seconds before he opened fire. A lone American fighter screaming in at treetop level wasn't what they expected. Some looked up in confusion, some froze, some started running. None of them reached their anti-aircraft positions in time. Stout lined up on the northern row of aircraft, Zeros mostly, some with their distinctive long-range drop tanks still attached, and did what F6F Hellcat pilots trained hundreds of hours to do. He squeezed the trigger. All 650 caliber Browning machine guns opened fire simultaneously. If you've never heard 650 cal machine guns fire at once, let me tell you, it's not like the movies. It's not a rat-a-tat-tat sound. It's a continuous earth-shaking roar that drowns out everything else, including the engine. The entire aircraft vibrates. Empty brass casings, each one about the size of your finger, pour out of the wings by the hundreds. Each gun fires 800 rounds per minute. That's about 13 rounds per second per gun, times 6 guns. So Stout's Hellcat was throwing roughly 80 armor-piercing 50 caliber rounds downrange every second. The effect on thin-skinned Japanese aircraft was devastating. Tracers, every 5th round glows so pilots can see where they're shooting, walked across the tarmac like a glowing line of death. They stitched through the first zero like a sewing machine through paper. The fighter shuddered. Aluminum skin peeled away in strips. Fuel sprayed from ruptured tanks, misting into the tropical air. Stout adjusted his aim, and this is where experience mattered, and fired directly into a cluster of fuel drums stacked between 2 Nakajima bombers. The 50 caliber rounds hit those drums at about 2,900 feet per second. They didn't just puncture them, they shredded them. Aviation fuel exploded in a massive fireball that engulfed both bombers instantly. And here's where basic physics took over. The initial explosion created a blast wave that ruptured fuel tanks on both bombers. Their fuel ignited. Their ammunition cooked off. Those explosions hit fuel drums next to other aircraft. Those exploded too. Chain reaction. Within literally 3 or 4 seconds, half the northern row was on fire. Stout pulled up hard, G-forces slamming him into his seat, the airframe groaning under the stress. Behind him, flames leapt 50 feet into the sky. The blast wave actually rocked his Hellcat, shoving it sideways in the air like a giant's hand. Japanese ground crews scattered in every direction. Some were on fire, their clothes ignited by burning fuel. Some tried desperately to move aircraft away from the flames. Most just ran for their lives. And then the anti-aircraft gunners reached their positions. Stout was climbing away, weaving left and right, never flying straight for more than 2 seconds, when the sky around him filled with tracers. If you've seen World War II combat footage, you know what this looks like. Streams of glowing rounds arcing through the air like deadly fireworks. 20mm cannon shells, each one about the size of a small flashlight, exploding in midair when they miss, creating little puffs of black smoke. Stout felt impacts shudder through his aircraft. Wham, wham, wham. Rounds punching through the tail section. Metal tearing, warning lights flickering on the instrument panel. But, and this is important, The F6F Hellcat was built to take punishment. It wasn't the fastest fighter in the Pacific. It wasn't the most maneuverable, but it was tough. Pilots called it the aluminum tank because it could absorb damage that would drop other aircraft out of the sky. The engine kept running strong. Controls still responded. He was hurt, but not dead. Stout banked hard right, gaining altitude, and looked back. 20 aircraft burning, maybe more. Flames spreading across the tarmac like a river of liquid fire. Thick black smoke, the kind you get from burning aviation fuel and rubber, boiling thousands of feet into the sky. That smoke column was visible for 10-15 miles, but on the southern end of the field, at least 20 more aircraft sat untouched. Stout checked his ammunition counter. Half gone, maybe 6 seconds of trigger time left. The anti-aircraft guns were all manned now, tracking him, waiting. Coming back for a second pass was suicide. He rolled inverted and dove anyway. Here's what you need to understand about Stout's decision to go back. He didn't have to do it. He'd already destroyed 20 aircraft. That alone was more than most fighter pilots destroyed in their entire careers. He'd accomplished an incredible mission. He could leave right now, head back to the carrier, and legitimately claim one of the most successful solo attacks in naval aviation history. 20 aircraft destroyed still meant 20 aircraft operational. 20 aircraft that could still attack the Marines. 20 aircraft that could still kill the men in those landing craft. So he went back. This time, the anti-aircraft fire was immediate and overwhelming. The Japanese gunners had his altitude, his speed, his general approach pattern. They'd had time to coordinate, to calculate firing solutions. The sky around Stout's Hellcat turned into a literal wall of tracers. He jinked left, hard bank, almost vertical, airspeed bleeding off. Then right, snap roll the other direction, throttle adjustments to maintain energy. Then left again, never holding a straight line, never being predictable. This is what fighter pilot training is really about, not just flying the aircraft, but flying it at the absolute edge of its performance envelope while people are actively trying to kill you, while making split-second decisions, while tracking multiple threats simultaneously, while still aiming your weapons accurately. Stout did all of this instinctively. No time to think, just react. The Hellcat shuddered under more impacts. He felt something give in the tail section. Metal tearing, control cables snapping or stretching. The stick felt wrong, heavier, mushy, less responsive. The aircraft was dying under him. But he was committed to the dive now. No turning back. He came in from a completely different angle, west to east instead of north to south, targeting the bombers on the southern end of the field. These were bigger aircraft. Nakajima B-5Ns, probably. Kate bombers, as Americans called them. Each one loaded with bombs or torpedoes meant for the American fleet. Each one a flying bomb if you hit it right. Stout held the trigger down. His remaining ammunition hammered into the aircraft, shredding control surfaces, puncturing fuel tanks, ripping through engine cowlings. Then he walked his fire across a fuel truck that was, incredibly, still trying to service an aircraft even with half the airfield on fire. The truck exploded. Not just caught fire. Exploded. The whole thing went up like it was packed with TNT. The blast wave flipped a nearby bomber completely over, landing it upside down like a turtle. Secondary explosions started immediately. Burning fuel from the truck spread to stacked ammunition crates. The crates detonated in a rapid-fire series of blasts. Boom, 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 like a giant drumming on the island. Then the bomber's own ordnance cooked off. Torpedoes exploding. Bombs detonating. Each explosion feeding the next. The whole southern section of the airfield turned into an inferno as intense as the northern row. Stout's guns fell silent, empty. Every round fired. 2,400 rounds gone in about 12 seconds of actual trigger time. The Hellcat felt wrong now, sluggish. The damaged control surfaces making it fight him. More warning lights on the panel. Something was definitely leaking. A thin trail of smoke streamed behind the aircraft. Oil pressure dropping. Hydraulics failing. But below him, the entire airfield was consumed by fire. Every aircraft, every fuel drum, every structure, everything burning. The smoke column rose thousands of feet into the tropical sky, a massive black pillar marking the spot like a funeral pyre for the entire Japanese strike force. Stout pointed the crippled Hellcat toward the ocean and nursed it back toward USS Hornet. The controls felt like they were connected to the control surfaces by rubber bands instead of cables, oil pressure continuing to drop. He wasn't sure the landing gear would extend, but the engine was still running. For now, the flight back was the longest 30 minutes of his life, because now, with the adrenaline fading, the full weight of what he'd just done hit him. He'd directly disobeyed orders, not bent them, not interpreted them creatively, disobeyed them. Instead of taking reconnaissance photos and returning like he was explicitly instructed, he'd single-handedly attacked an entire enemy airfield without authorization. Court-martial was a real possibility. So was getting relieved of duty, grounded, career over. But the alternative, watching those 40 aircraft massacre Marines in landing craft 3 days from now, would have been worse than any punishment the Navy could hand down. USS Hornet appeared on the horizon like the most beautiful sight in the world. Stout radioed the tower. "This is Cowboy, aircraft damaged, uncertain about landing gear status, requesting priority landing." The carrier turned into the wind and cleared the deck. Crash crews stood ready with foam and fire extinguishers. His landing gear extended, but only partially. One main wheel wouldn't lock into position. He came in hot, caught the second arresting wire, and the damaged Hellcat slammed onto the deck hard enough to buckle metal. Deck crews swarmed the aircraft immediately, shocked at the damage. The tail section was shredded like Swiss cheese. The fuselage had over a dozen holes punched clean through it. Paint was scorched black from flying through multiple explosions. Hydraulic fluid leaked everywhere. How this aircraft had made it back was a minor miracle. Stout climbed down from the cockpit and found himself facing what looked like every officer on the ship. The air boss wanted to know why he'd returned with combat damage from what was supposed to be a simple photo reconnaissance mission. The squadron commander wanted to know why he'd broken radio silence without authorization. The intelligence officer wanted to know what the hell had happened over Peleliu. Stout's report was simple and direct. The airfield wasn't abandoned. It was packed with operational aircraft preparing to attack the invasion fleet. I engaged and destroyed them. Estimated 40 aircraft destroyed. 8 minutes total. The officer stared at him in stunned silence. The intelligence officer asked him to repeat the number. 40 aircraft? Yes, sir. 40 aircraft. Destroyed. 1 pilot, 1 aircraft. 40 enemy planes destroyed. That seemed impossible. The kind of claim that gets pilots laughed out of debriefing rooms or accused of exaggerating for decorations. But reconnaissance photos the next day confirmed it. The northern airfield at Peleliu was completely destroyed. Not a single aircraft remained operational. Aerial photography showed exactly 40 burned-out hulks of Japanese planes scattered across a blackened tarmac. Fuel dumps were smoking craters. Structures were rubble. The intelligence officers immediately revised their assessment of Japanese air strength on Peleliu. Instead of facing 40 aircraft on D-Day, the Marines would hit the beaches with complete air superiority. The Japanese air threat, the most dangerous element of any amphibious assault, had been eliminated by 1 pilot who refused to follow orders. The Navy awarded Stout the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for combat valor, second only to the Medal of Honor. The citation praised his extraordinary heroism and aggressive fighting spirit in attacking superior enemy forces while alone and unsupported, with complete disregard for his own personal safety. But here's what I need to tell you, and I need to be completely honest about this. Major Robert Cowboy Stout never made it home to California. He never got old, never had kids or grandkids, never told this story around a dinner table decades later. 6 months after his famous attack, on March 4, 1945, Robert Stout was killed in action. He was 26 years old. The details of his death aren't as dramatic as his Peleliu attack. There was no climactic final battle, no blaze of glory. He died doing what he'd been doing for years, flying combat missions in the Pacific, supporting Marines on the ground, facing enemy fire. He just didn't come back from one of them. His body was never recovered. His name is inscribed on the tablets of the missing at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, along with thousands of other servicemen who have no known grave. The attack he's remembered for, that incredible 8-minute solo strike, happened when he was 25 years old. He had less than 6 months left to live. He never knew his story would be studied by fighter pilots decades later. Never heard anyone call him a hero except maybe in that brief ceremony where they pinned the Navy Cross to his uniform. He just did his job, made a hard decision, kept flying missions, and then one day he didn't come back. Now I need to address something, because I promised you real history told honestly. There's legitimate debate among historians about exact details of this story. Some historians point out that the 40 aircraft destroyed number appears in military aviation circles, popular accounts, and veteran stories, but doesn't always perfectly align with primary wartime documents like squadron war diaries and after-action reports that professional historians prefer as sources. The truth, like most wartime truth, is complicated. What we know for certain. Robert Stout flew a reconnaissance mission over Peleliu on September 12, 1944. That's documented. He encountered Japanese aircraft on the airfield and attacked them instead of just photographing them. That's documented. He was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions that day. The citation is real and describes him attacking enemy forces alone and unsupported. Reconnaissance photos the following day show extensive damage to the Peleliu airfield. That's documented. He was killed in action on March 4, 1945. That's documented. The exact number, 40 aircraft, has been repeated for decades in military aviation history. But some careful historians note it's harder to verify with primary documentation to the standard they require for absolute certainty. Does that matter? I think it matters that we are honest about what we know and what we can't completely verify. But I also think the core of the story, that a single pilot made a split-second decision to disobey direct orders and attack an airfield full of enemy aircraft, preventing them from attacking the Peleliu invasion fleet. That story is fundamentally true, and the implications of that decision are worth understanding, whether the exact count was 40 or 35 or 30. Because here's what we know about the Battle of Peleliu that followed. The Marines landed on September 15, 1944, 3 days after Stout's attack, and walked into absolute hell. Japanese forces had fortified the island's coral ridges and caves with a sophistication nobody expected. Every position was a death trap. Every cave was connected to other caves. Every ridge had interlocking fields of fire. The battle lasted over 2 months and cost nearly 2,000 American lives, over 10,000 wounded. The fighting was so brutal that it's still studied today as an example of how determined defenders with prepared positions can inflict catastrophic casualties even when outnumbered and outgunned. But here's the critical point. The Marines landed with AIR superiority. Japanese aircraft didn't strafe the landing craft as they approached the beaches, didn't bomb the transport ships packed with thousands of troops, didn't attack the vulnerable amphibious tractors as they crawled across the coral reef. The first hours of any amphibious assault are when troops are most vulnerable. They're packed in boats that can't maneuver quickly. They're in the water where they can't take cover. They're focused on reaching shore, not defending themselves. That's when air attacks are most devastating. Military historians who've studied the Peleliu invasion agree. If 30 to 40 operational Japanese aircraft had been available to attack during those critical first hours, American casualties would have been significantly higher. Conservative estimates suggest Stout's attack saved between 500 and 1,000 Marine lives on D-Day alone. That's not speculation. That's based on casualty analysis from other Pacific battles where Japanese air power was a factor during landings. At Tarawa, Japanese air attacks during the landing killed Marines by the hundreds before they reached shore. At Saipan, Japanese aircraft attacked the fleet and destroyed supply ships that ground forces desperately needed. At Peleliu, the Marines faced absolute hell on the ground, but they didn't face it from the air. Because one pilot had decided that following orders to the letter would cost American lives. Modern fighter pilots still study Stout's attack in tactical training courses, not just for the flying skills, though coming in at 50 feet at 300 miles while being shot at requires incredible skill, but for the decision-making under pressure. The military teaches something called commander's intent, the idea that you should understand the purpose behind orders, not just follow specific instructions blindly. Stout's orders were to photograph the airfield, but the intent behind those orders was to gather intelligence to protect the invasion force. When he spotted 40 aircraft preparing to attack that invasion force, he understood that the intent of his mission had changed. The most valuable thing he could do wasn't photograph those aircraft, it was destroy them. Following his orders to the letter would have meant American deaths. Following the intent behind his orders meant disobeying the specific instructions. The Navy recognized this by awarding him the Navy Cross instead of court-martialing him. They understood that rigid adherence to procedure would have been a disaster. But there's something else worth noting. Stout didn't just go in guns blazing. He analyzed the target, identified the fuel drums as the critical vulnerability, planned his attack runs, used physics and chain reactions instead of trying to destroy 40 aircraft with 12 seconds of ammunition. One bullet in the right place accomplished more than 1,000 bullets in wrong places. He attacked from multiple angles to minimize his exposure. And critically, he knew when to stop. Once his ammunition was gone, he left. No loitering. No trying to assess more damage. Mission accomplished. Time to go home. All these decisions happened in seconds, under fire, with anti-aircraft rounds tearing through his aircraft. That's what training and experience give you, the ability to make split-second choices that are each correct. So what can we learn from Robert Cowboy Stout's 8 minutes over Peleliu? I think there are lessons here that go way beyond military tactics. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to follow instructions that don't make sense in the moment you're living. Not out of arrogance, not out of rebellion, but because the situation demands action that rigid procedure would prevent. Stout wasn't trying to be a hero. He was trying to solve a problem. The problem, 40 enemy aircraft preparing to kill American Marines. The solution, light those aircraft on fire before they could launch. He understood the difference between following orders and completing the mission. Sometimes those are the same thing. Sometimes they're not. In your own life, you'll face situations where following the rules feels wrong, where rigid procedure conflicts with obvious necessity, where doing what you're told would produce a worse outcome than trusting your own judgment. Remember Cowboy Stout circling over that airfield. He knew what needed to happen. He knew it might cost him his life. He knew it might end his career, and he did it anyway because the alternative was worse. 6 months later, Robert Stout was dead at age 26. He never got to go home, never knew his 8-minute attack would be studied decades later, never heard most people call him a hero. He just did something extraordinary, and then kept flying until he didn't come back. But what he did mattered. The Marines who landed on Peleliu never knew a Navy pilot had saved their lives. They just knew they made it to the beach without being strafed from the air. They still fought through hell on that coral island, but at least they got to fight. They didn't die in their landing craft before ever reaching shore. Robert Cowboy Stout gave them that chance. If you made it this far, thank you for taking the time to hear this story told right. This is the kind of history that deserves honest, human storytelling, not AI-generated garbage that gets basic facts wrong and mispronounces .50 caliber as .50. If you appreciated this, hit that subscribe button for more real World War II stories told by actual humans who care about getting the details right. Drop a comment and let me know. Do you think Stout made the right decision? Would you have followed orders or trusted your judgment? And to everyone already subscribed, thank you. You make this channel possible. Remember, these stories matter. These people mattered. Robert Cowboy Stout, age 26, killed in action, March 4, 1945, Navy Cross recipient, hero of Peleliu. Gone, but not forgotten.